right, good evening. Welcome to the special meeting closed session of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. It is Thursday, September 14th, 2017, and I will take roll. Vice President Natoli?
Present.
Director Hassai?
Present.
Director Welsh?
Here.
Director Deppie?
Here.
And I am Board President Rochelle Sherris-Watt. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Christopher Deppie to our board, and thank you for joining us. Mr. Deppie has taken the oath of office and will have the ceremonial oath of office occur during the regular open meeting. Right now, we will take comments from the public. Seeing as there are none, we will adjourn into closed session. Open session will begin at 7:30 p.m. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the September 14th, 2017 regular meeting of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. I am Board President Rochelle Sherris-Watt, and I will take roll. Vice President Natoli?
Present.
Director Hassai?
Present.
Director Welsh?
Here.
And Director Deppie.
Here.
We would like to welcome Mr. Deppie to our Board of Directors, and we will now have him take the oath of office. To let you know, he signed the oath before the closed session began. So he was legal then, but we will now have him recite the oath for public. General Manager Tony Constantoros will present the oath. All right. We will now take public comments from, for items not on the agenda.
Thank you. Good evening. You'll have to bear with me this evening. I would like to address three issues that were covered in the September 2017 Outlook. First, on the selection of our new director, Chris Deppie. The Outlook article and several letters to the editor gave mixed views on the selection process. While I was not able to attend the last board meeting, I did listen to the audio. Although I did not hear any of the candidates identify specific areas for controlling costs, I am hopeful that our new director, Chris Deppe, will immediately inform himself on the larger financial issues and potential solutions to these problems. Another article in the Outlook described a recent high-speed chase of a stolen car by two Kensington police officers. Given what occurred, there was great risk of personal injury, as well as astronomical legal exposure to the district if someone had been hurt in this chase. I hope the district will adopt clear guidelines regarding pursuit, which I feel should be greatly curtailed given Kensington's street network. We also need to know if the chase was really called off when the stolen vehicle went up the Arlington the wrong way, and the cost of the damage to the Kensington police vehicles involved in this pursuit. Finally, there was an Outlook letter from Don Domer regarding the upgrade of the public safety building. In that article, Don states, quote, "We feel a structural upgrade is not a wise direction, so we are developing a survey of deficiencies for public review," unquote. With that built-in bias, Don goes on to say they are still pursuing an on-site replacement based on a reduced project to fit the budget, and they have retained a financial consultant to determine their funding capability. What should we expect from this new evaluation, other than a very costly new structure, with the fire district assuming the KPPCSD will pay about a third of these costs in added rent? It is time for this board to take a stand on the matter before the fire district wastes any more money and studies involving a replacement of the building. A few months ago, the board voted to pay the fire district $35,000 in annual rent for the space used by the police department. As someone who works in commercial real estate, I happen to think that such a rent is justifiable based upon market conditions. However, in the world of commercial real estate, tenants typically have no obligation for structural upgrades to include seismic repairs or for any enhanced improvements unless specifically requested by the tenant, or in this case, the KPPCSD. Also in commercial real estate, it is common that if a tenant has to vacate its premises as a result of a landlord-required reconstruction, that tenant's rent is abated until the premises can be reoccupied. So far, everything that we have heard from the fire district is that all the work being proposed is due to required seismic upgrades and an expansion that benefits the fire department. Therefore, I believe the KPPCSD board should inform the fire district that any costs for a replacement or an upgrade of the public facility building should be the sole responsibility of the fire district, and that the KPPCSD should only be obligated to pay the market rent for the space that it occupies, and that this rent should be abated during reconstruction. It is important to do this now that the fire district has engaged a financial consultant. If the fire district understands that they are on the hook for the bulk of these building costs with no rental adjustment from the KPPCSD, then maybe they will take a more realistic look at their options, thereby saving Kensington taxpayers considerable construction costs. Such an approach will also put to rest the concerns that many of us have that the KPPCSD has potential exposure for significant financial costs incurred by the fire district. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Katya Deniergaard. As some of you may know, I put up a poll on Nextdoor asking, do you want Kensington to contract out for police services? And this is just a simple straw poll, not scientific. But I wanted to explore the narrative that one point of view had the back of the silent majority. What does the silent majority actually say? And I also have the concern that whatever choice is made for contracting out or not contracting out or partially contracting out, that it would be Kensington's choice, that the people would have the education and be able to make the choice themselves. So as the poll with 159 people voting shows 48% wish to keep police services as is, an independent force. 16% wanted contracting out for police services unconditionally, and an additional 27% wanted contracting out if certain conditions were met. And the two sets of conditions that were the most popular were at 9% contracting out only if we can get better, more professional service and save money. Alternately, 9% wanted retain current levels of service and save money. So that brings the total of wanting contracting out, including if certain conditions to be met, to 43%. And an additional 9% needs more information, and 1% said other choice. And so even though this is just a casual straw poll, what it sort of says to me is the community is pretty divided right now about inclinations of going one way or the other, and that we do need more information and education to help make a decision. And with this division, it would be hard to claim a silent majority. So, that actually I felt, kind of relieved about that, people had different points of view, and now we're going to explore the options. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Good evening. I'm Carl Kruger. I went to the fire board meeting last week, and I was surprised to hear the announcement that the fire board was told by this board that there would be a decision this month on the contracting out. I like to sit in a corner and there's sort of a cabinet. Luckily, there's a cabinet. I would have fallen off my chair to hear that somebody decided there was going to be a decision at the end of this month. We have not even had a discussion on the issue. I clearly stand against contracting out. I don't think there's anybody in this community who is stronger anti-contracting out than I am, but I am surprised. So would you tell me, what did you tell the fire board to make them say that?
We are not making a decision on contracting out this month.
So you're telling me they made it up, or they made a
Sorry,
mistake?
no one from this board was at that meeting, and so we cannot refute what.
Carl, that sounds an awful lot like a misunderstanding to me, because we're nowhere near there. In fact, if you look at what we're talking about on the agenda tonight, it's exploring in a totally unbiased fashion the pros and cons. So I think that's misinformation. Not anybody's fault, just a misunderstanding.
Just wanna settle your mind.
I was shocked to hear that.
I can imagine you would be.
Welcome, new Director Deppie. Linda Lipscomb, Kensington resident. If I stand back here, is that sufficiently low for people's standards? I'm sorry, it's just all those years in theater, in college. I do want to welcome you. This is a difficult task, and I want to thank you for giving up your time to do it, and I trust that you will come at it with an open mind and evaluate it on behalf of all of the citizens. My comments are, actually, there are two different fields. One is on the back of the comment that was made regarding the fire board and the arrangements that we currently have. I want to throw this out there again. The statistics that I've seen regarding the fire services that we get indicate that approximately 40% of the services, at least 40% of the services that come out of the Kensington station go to service other communities in the main into El Cerrito. I wonder if anybody has considered if there is going to be an upgrade from our board to, and if there's a request by them, by the fire board to share in those upgrades, that if instead we might look at it from the point of view of whether the services that are proportional amount of services that are going to the other community, might we not ask that community to participate in providing for us for the upgrade of that building? And I'm just thinking of that as we always see it from the other side because we own the building, it's our problem, we have to fix it. But the services are really being spread at this point significantly to be the third station of El Cerrito, and perhaps El Cerrito would like to participate monetarily in the upgrade to the building, since from what I have seen, looking at the reasons for the upgrade, one is the quality of the building itself in terms of seismic and modernization, comfort of staff. The other really is serviceability for accommodating a larger fire engine, which most of us know by common sense in our community is not the best thing insofar as we have very small and tortuous streets. One might suspect that a larger fire engine is meant to accommodate the services to another community, i.e. to get up and down Mosier in a better fashion. Just throwing it out there that from the bargaining point, because we're supposed to be bargaining in respect of Kensington citizens, that there might be a participation from the other side. That's on one topic. And I almost, geez, the wages of age, I almost forgot the other one that I want to talk about tonight. And that is, I'm continuing to advocate for looking at things from the point of view of possibly coming at this as one town, with an overview. I know we're about to engage in looking at this contracting out and all, but I want to keep at least as an overarching idea, the idea that we are one town. I know some people, I know in particular Professor Gutierrez has mentioned that we're not really a city. You're quite right on that. We're not incorporated, but we are one town, and we have a distinct character, a distinct personality, a high level of services that we're delivering to the citizenry here, and a high quality of life. For all the schisms, all the arguments, all of the internecine warfare that I see, we still enjoy this really high quality of life. So I don't want to forget that we still have a possibility to be one combined citizenry, perhaps with both of the districts combined. So putting that out there once more with feeling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Dora, Kensington resident. Wow. Chris, congratulations and thank you for agreeing to serve on the board. Looking at the agenda for tonight, I was struck by the fact that for the first time that I can remember in at least a year, there was no closed agenda item for personnel matters. And so that raises in my mind two questions, really. I know that we had personnel out on disability, and I know also that we had at least one officer out on administrative leave. And if it is possible to do so, I would think that most of us would like to be updated on what is the status of the police department personnel.
Thank you. No, we cannot. No, we're moving on. Anyone else? All right, board comments?
I just want to welcome our new board member as well. I remember the feeling I had when I applied my way to get on the board, and there was dissension in the votes that led to me being here. And I'll acknowledge I was the only member who voted against, well, not against you, but for, yes, your competitive partner, David Spath, who may give it another shot at a later time. But I just want to say I'm glad to see you on the board. I want to welcome you and look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much.
All right, I also wish to welcome Mr. Deppie, and I thank all my board members because they have shown an indomitable spirit and willingness to do a great amount of work, and I appreciate them every week. So not just when we have meetings, but all the effort they put in. So I thank them all. I'd like to announce that there will be a Finance Committee meeting next Thursday, September 27th at 7 p.m. here. Unfortunately, that also conflicts, you will have to make a decision, it will be hard, with the Solid Waste Committee meeting also here. You could run back and forth.
Ours is on the 21st.
Also on the 21st here, but there is a conflict. It's the same evening, but
Same times, or what?
same time.
She's saying it's the 21st.
21st.
I'm sorry, did I misspeak and say that it was minus the 21st?
Oh, yours
Thursday, September 21st,
okay.
yes. So, next Thursday.
Okay.
So, we apologize, we will refrain from doing that in the future. Any staff comments? Tony, would you like to welcome Courtney?
So we have someone filling in to help with the minutes tonight, and that's Courtney. And this is her first meeting, so and she's doing a great job for someone who really doesn't know all the people and doesn't know how to spell all the names.
Well, we'll all practice our elocution tonight and our diction. All right, so we're moving on to item 8, our consent calendar. Do any board members like to pull any of the items from the consent calendar? Item B. All right. And D as in David and I. All right. Let us begin with item B. Mr. Kruger, if you would like to come to the podium.
My question is, why did we run a 7.5-year statement? I was a little surprised to see a financial statement that showed 7.5 years of operation. And once I have an answer to that, I have one more question. I was surprised we go all the way back to 2010.
Yes, this was in gross error, and we are updating this, I apologize, we are updating this document, and a correct copy of this will appear before the Finance Committee next week to be approved, and then it will appear on our September 28th.
Fine.
26th, 28th meeting.
Okay.
Sorry, 28th.
Then I have a question. Why did we separate the legal fees? We put some of the legal fees on the district, and we put some of them on the police. Of course, it makes it look good because you don't have $100,000 on any one line item, But just because you have two line items, that does not make the legal fees any smaller. Or I also don't understand how we divide what is police and what is district. The amounts are almost equal. It seems to me it's sort of playing with the numbers more than anything.
This could be perhaps elaborated on by our general counsel, Ms. Danforth, in just a moment, but this decision was made in June with the discussion between the board and Deborah Russell, and ultimately, because we receive, a return of WestNet funds and some of our COPS grants, some of those items require spending funds only for police services. So we wanted a little bit more accurate portrait, given that we've also been handling quite a variety of police matters. It's not an attempt to hide funds, and you're absolutely right. Perhaps we need an overall statement that has a lump for legality, but it does show the board where our funds are being spent, and so that perhaps we can offer some more guidance and regain more control over those funds.
Seems like a fair explanation. Now, if I had seen this at Finance Committee during budget time, then I would have been less suspicious.
I understand. It was a recommendation that we discussed, Deborah Russell discussed after the Finance Committee discussion.
Good evening again, Jim Watt. I too, of course, had questions about the budget, and as our general manager knows, I emailed him several days ago, and a short time ago, I got a response to some of those questions from Debbie Russell. I'm not going to go into them because they're really kind of technical in nature, although they're rather substantial in terms of their amounts, and I happen to disagree with Debbie on some of her conclusions there. But rather, I think that the comments that I made are really more appropriate at this point for the Finance Committee. But it might be helpful if, prior to that Finance Committee, and I think that Rochelle is the chair of that committee, if she could email out to the committee Deborah's response to my email so that we have at least a starting point from which to talk to. I did, however, as part of the email back from Debbie, I did see some footnotes because I'm surprised Carl did not mention this, but in addition to having this rather peculiar look at our finances over the last 7 years, there were no footnotes as to unusual modifications in the budget. And so I received some comments from Deborah Russell, and I have some questions here that hopefully can be answered. I'm not sure if public comment these can be, consent item things. She informs me that one of the reasons why the salary code number 502 was higher than anticipated is due to the fact that Officer Barrows was reinstated. I presume that this means that Officer Barrows' claim that he was not treated properly and should be reinstated back to, I guess, his current position was in fact upheld by whoever it is that reviews this. And I think it would be nice for the public to know this, and it's surprising that something as important as that was not brought to our attention. There's also a mention in this email from Debbie Russell that under category 504, which is called compensated absences, that this particular category is high due to Sergeant Huey's separation and a $20,000 cost associated with this. Are we to understand that Sergeant Huey is no longer a member of the police force? And again, if so, it would be nice if we could know that in advance. So those were my comments relative to the budget. And as it seems that I am the only one that added some other consent calendar items to talk about, I'd like to just quickly talk about those. The consent calendar item number D, as in dog, mentions that the Kensington Police Department monthly statistics for August were not available for this particular packet. I find that very strange. I mean, I think that it's absolutely important that at the start of each month, since we now meet twice a month, that we get to see what it is that our officers have been doing. Had in fact that been included, we might have gotten a better understanding as to what is happening with Sergeant Barrows, Sergeant Huey, and I even have heard some comments about whether or not Sergeant Stephanie Wilkins is even available for patrol duty. So again, somebody had asked the question, I think it was Paul Doro, I think it would be beneficial if we could find this out. This is very important to us. We're paying a lot of money for these officers, and we'd like to know their status. Finally, consent item number I is the designation of negotiations. And basically this is, it's contained in your packet, but this basically designates our general manager together with our attorney, Mr. Holtzman, to work on our behalf to negotiate a new MOU for the district. And for those of you that don't know MOU, it's the Memorandum of Understanding. It's the contract with our police department, which expires at the end of December. Well, I'm sure that these individuals, our general manager and Mr. Holtzman, will do a good job. I certainly hope so. I have been very critical in the past of some of the negotiations that have resulted from by our team, but I'm hopeful that will change going forward. What I guess I'm asking here is we're designating people to negotiate a contract, which in my opinion is critically important, and quite frankly, I think it's critically important in the context of whether or not we're even going to retain an independent police department. Because everything that I have seen is that most other agencies have considerably better benefit terms for their agency than we do in our agency. And while I understand that we made some improvements relative to the contributions that we now require of our officers for health benefits, we are still far behind such other agencies as Albany and El Cerrito, both of whom do not make any contributions for their employees, but at least in the case of Albany, and may also be true of El Cerrito, they have set up an account whereby they make contributions into that account for those employees, which they can draw on for their medical benefits when they retire. So I'm going into a little bit more than I wanted to on this, other than that I'm hopeful that our general manager is hearing my concerns, because he knows that I will probably be calling him or emailing him relative to what I believe should be the primary goal of these negotiations, but I basically said it, which is to try to extract better benefits, as has been the case with these other agencies, relative to our benefit obligations for our employees. Thank you.
All right, I can answer the question concerning item D. That is a statement that there are, and it says none this meeting, there will be monthly statistics. Unfortunately, staff neglected to procure the statistics from our chief of police. He has those available and they will appear in the next agenda. Concerning the status of employees, board members typically do not make statements until instructed by legal counsel. We would encourage our staff to follow the same protocol, as it otherwise leaves us open to liability and lawsuit. So until I get a high sign or the comment from our legal team, none of the board members will be commenting on the status of employees. Thank you. All right. So I do want to highlight item I, that we are entrusting our general manager, Tony Constantoros, with a second from John Holtzman, one of our legal representatives from the Public Law Group, to begin negotiations for a memorandum of understanding with the Kensington Police Department. That being said, if there are any more comments regarding the consent calendar?
Hi, Linda Lipscomb. I did want to just address one thing to what Jim Watts said. It is true that in some other jurisdictions, such as El Cerrito, there are greater gains in the contribution of officers to the health and welfare benefits, to their benefit package. I want to add that prior to that contribution being negotiated, my recollection, I'm talking off the top of my head here, is that within a period of some 2.5 years to 3 years, those officers received some 17% in wage raises, which were then given back in part for contributions. Such has not been the case with the Kensington force.
All right, thank you. I make a motion that we accept the consent calendar.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, the motion passes 5-0. The consent calendar is approved. We move to our final item of the evening, number 9, that appears on page 54 of your agenda. This is a request for proposals for an evolution of options related to delivering police services, and our general manager, Tony Constantoros, will introduce the item to us.
Thank you. I thought I should use the podium to discuss this item a little bit. As the community knows, sure, I don't have the strong voice that Linda has, so I have to get a little closer to the microphone. But on this issue on police, as the community knows, it has been a major community issue for at least the last decade. And the last report was the ad hoc committee report in October of 2016. Among the recommendations in that report, the committee recommended hiring a professional to provide additional information. So the item on tonight's agenda is exactly that. It's to seek proposals from professionals to provide that information. It's really the next step in this evaluation process. It isn't making a decision. It's really just finding a professional to provide that information. And the information basically falls into the categories of, first of all, determining the cost and organization of the current department. What is the appropriate organization for a police department in Kensington? What is the staffing level? What's the organization of it? What are the appropriate levels? And what costs are involved in making that decision? The second part of that then is to compare that organization to contracting options. So what options are there? There were some proposals. They were not complete proposals, but the intent would be to obtain complete proposals from neighboring jurisdictions and at least invite them. We don't know who would actually make a proposal, and then compare them to this organization that would really be the correct organization for the community. And the third element of that is public input. This report here shows public input opportunities at 2 times, but that could change too as the report continues. There could be additional opportunities for public input depending on how the report proceeds. This report will take some time to complete. I don't know exactly how long. I estimate 6 months, but it could take longer than 6 months. The report, I tried to make it a little easier to understand by putting it into 4 phases. But one of the things I've learned in doing requests for proposal is once they start, they tend to change. As information is obtained, there's additional information that maybe is recommended and additional facets of a report that we didn't include originally. And we want to be flexible to get the input from a professional to make those adjustments if they're recommended. And this report also will change based on input from citizens. So citizens' input could change some of the information that's included and some of the direction of the report. It also could change from input from the neighboring agencies. They may provide information that changes some of the requirements of the report. Perhaps there's different, we want to make some amendments to the proposals. We want to indicate what kind of department we want, but there may be a proposal that is really of interest to Kensington, and we want to be open to that. And then finally, the cost analysis that's completed will also influence the kind of report and maybe offer some changes in the process. I have already received some suggestions, and we're interested in any suggestions that the community has this evening or later if you want to email me. Keep in mind, though, the report will change, and it will, and we want to communicate what those changes are. The suggested changes include a deletion of the description of the department in the first section, which is really copied from the ad hoc committee. It's been pointed out to me that there are some information there is not completely up to date. So we don't want to include information that isn't up to date to send to the consultants. Also, there's been some improved descriptions of the community that have been put forward that I think are very helpful that I want to include. And then there are some specifics to the 4 phases that add specifics to them, and I think they're fine to add this. You'll note in my first draft I had 3 phases, but then I changed it to 4 phases, just to try to make it clear that there are distinct parts of this. And also the public input, I had it really at the beginning on phase 1 before we really even start the process. And I also had a public input when there's a comparison of the options. So we're down when we have the information, that would be a time to get public input on those options. But I've also had input that some people would like public input at phase 2 also, even with the initial observations, and still want to have some input at that phase 2. There are significant costs also with this report. I've estimated, I guessed at the possible cost, they're probably going to be toward the higher end of the $50,000 to $100,000 range. But I also wanted to note that there are a lot of costs currently in the police department that are unusual, that you don't find in most departments. Litigation, I think Mr. Kruger pointed that out a little earlier, can be very high. It's unnecessarily high for our department. It's when it ranges to $100,000 per year, that's a very, very high cost. And also when up to 30% or 40% of your department is not working for various personnel reasons, that's really not an acceptable part of a police department that you want. So those are problems that need to be addressed and fixed. And so I believe the report actually will pay for itself by solving these problems in the near future. Whatever decision is made, these problems need to be solved. And then the savings will accrue for forever. I have talked to a few cities about litigation costs in police departments, and they're basically zero in most agencies that I've talked to. In fact, where I worked, it was zero for 18 years. So I know it's possible to bring that cost down, and we should bring that. Now, this report makes no decision. There could be rumors out there or misunderstanding. Really, there is no recommendation to contract or not to contract in this report. This report is just to hire someone to get information. that would help us make that decision and evaluate that decision. So that concludes my very brief overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm interested in hearing whatever input there is.
I think it's a great proposal you've made. I have only one question really, which is how do you envision the process of seeking public input to take place?
Well, I wanted to get the consultant involved in that, but I foresee a typical having a meeting, advertising in advance, and having the public come to a meeting like this where some information is presented and the public has a chance to respond to that information. Thank you.
Even though you obviously can't tell how it's all going to go, and you did give an estimate of maybe 6 months, would it be possible to put proposed or suggested timelines on individual phases so the consultants at least have an idea about what we're thinking?
Well, there would be it's possible, but it's hard to do without talking to the consultants first and seeing what their input is. Mm-hmm. I'd like to do it as quickly as possible, but there could be reasons to take more time, and we don't want to shortchange ourselves if there are good reasons, and I want to hear those reasons first. That's why I made an overall estimate. I think the 6 months is a reasonable estimate. Part of the problem in doing these studies that isn't the information is just setting up meetings like the public meetings. The public needs advance notice. That takes time. So the time frame gets extended for those reasons. Those are good reasons, but it does extend the time frame.
I think my one recommendation is perhaps to expand the number of directors interviewing the finalists, but that is the only, I perhaps would like to see 2 directors doing the interviewing, but I think that's something that we can discuss and develop as the
That is a board decision, so the board can
proposal
expand that if the board
goes
wishes
forward.
to. I also had the option of inviting possibly police chiefs from neighboring cities to at least to interview the consultants, but not, they wouldn't be part of the selection, they would just be part of the interview. But that's also open for discussion if the board has preferences.
I think that would be something that the board would want to consider analyzing and probably, I think it initially comes across to me as somewhat problematic, but we can absolutely take that into consideration as we appoint the interviewees besides yourself and our interim chief of police. Director Tsai?
Yes, I want to thank you very much for being so responsive to the concerns of the community. And I know you've spoken to individual board members all through the interview process and the last few months, and this is very much reflects where I know I wanted us to go as far as a process, and I really appreciate you taking everyone's feedback, community members, as well as board direction. This is one of the most important tasks. When we hired our general manager, this was part of the process and discussion, and it was a very important piece of it, and I think you have done a great job in laying out a very detailed process. I do have a few recommendations as well. I also believe it's a good idea to expand the number of directors potentially to work with you on interviewing people. I have some very specific things here. I'll say them out loud, and then if you need me to repeat them or to give them to you in writing, I will do that.
Okay.
In Phase 2, under preliminary findings, you, in Phase 4, talk about recommended performance measures to evaluate success. I'd like to make sure that those recommended performance measures to evaluate success are applied to our own department in Phase 2 when that evaluation is done. I also noticed those things that were sort of incorrect in description. Thank you for correcting that. Under the consultant's proposal section, which is page 66 of our packet and page 9 of your document, I'd like to include, to ask the consultants if they have any personal or professional connections to KPPCSD board members, staff, or even Kensington residents that should be at least noted a connection does not mean a problem, but it's important to at least flag any previous relationships. And that could be for the consultant that would work on the project and potentially the principals of the firm, the ownership. I don't think if it's a big firm, you can't ask for every employee in the firm.
And not to interrupt you, but I would like to let you all know that that is a standard question that's been asked in every interviewing process that I've ever been part of on the KPPCSD. We always ask each candidate if they have any relationship to board members, community members, our legal team, so that we are aware of any potential or probable conflicts of interest.
Another item I noted under the RFP evaluation criteria, which is page 68 of the packet, the third paragraph says "the city." I believe that should be the district in that. And I would like some clarification on the first bullet point. The ending phrase says, "with a preference for the demonstrated experience of the assigned consultants with similarly sized or California cities." Is it similarly sized communities or cities in California, or just similarly sized communities or cities in California?
There are consultants that have done reports for other areas in the country.
Okay.
And those studies are relevant, but the legal requirements and the way police operate can be so different that we just have a preference for California, that's all it is. And we really want with similarly sized, smaller cities. So if you've done a study for Los Angeles, I'm not sure it's going to be relevant to Kensington.
Right, okay. I just wanted some...
That's the intent of that.
Thank you. I just wanted some clarification. And I believe those were my very specific comments. But again, thank you very much for taking the input of the community members that you met with, and for listening to our community over the last several months that you've been here, and for really respecting where I think the board had hoped that you would be going.
And I also want to thank President Chair Swat for having Tony prepare this proposal. I think it's an excellent way to begin this process. We all recognize that there have been some very significant problems associated with our police. We've talked about the cost. And this is a tool that I think we could really evaluate our current department in your phase one, and look to see what options we might have. One thing that I want to just mention, you do have it on page 66, which is the CalPERS issue, and that is an issue that will need to be explored thoroughly, what our options are with respect to CalPERS and the cost associated with various options. And one thing I want to comment on, too, is you estimate that the cost of the study could be between $50,000 and $100,000. And my concern is that we've talked about the financial constraints on the district. We have a lot of financial obligations that we want to meet and need to meet. We have to manage this process very carefully to make sure we don't expand. And the consultant knows that even though there may be some changes, this really has to be done on a very tight budget. And it'll have to be very closely monitored to make sure that we don't exceed the budget by having them do this and do that and expand the scope out of what we might want, because that can really balloon the cost in working with the consultants.
To piggyback on that point, I actually would like to see the next budget actually reflect this potential cost for this work. I don't believe it's here yet, and I would like to see our budget, that's going to be our final budget adopted before the end of the month, reflect these costs.
We don't have a proposal yet, so I have a cost range, and I don't know what the number will be.
I think that's okay. Budgeting is often just, estimating, and if it means going to the high end of that range or mid, as long as we just account for it to some extent. I realize that you may put in 75 or 80, and it could be 100, and we may not want to tip off consultants what we want to spend. I think they'd have to be really astute to find that in here, but...
The other thing on this, the consultant's proposal, a couple of the residents have suggested that maybe we want more paper copies, so I wanted to adjust that to 10 paper copies. I think it says 6, it was 5, 6. I started with 5, then I went to 6, but I think we want to add 10 so we have some extra ones.
Get ready to print a whole lot more.
They'll charge us for it, but it can't be that expensive.
Well, I think we'll have to, yeah.
And we
I also wanted
put
to
an
add,
electronic copy that we have on the internet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll post them,
we
obviously.
could do that. I also want to add that this is really a professional services RFP, which is a little different than a construction project. And in a construction project where there's bidding, we're really obligated to select the lowest responsible bidder. You're not on this kind of RFP. You're not obligated to select the lowest person. You really want to pick the person that best meets the needs of the community, and sometimes it's not the lowest bidder.
Well, I want to first appreciate the work of the ad hoc committee, which was in many ways the first step that got us here. And I also want to thank the general manager who took a lot of input and clarified it and distilled it to move us forward. So I thank you very much. And I guess we'll take public comment and question now, and then
Leonard Schwartzberg. I, too, want to thank our general manager for a really excellent, shall we call it a protocol for an RFP. I was really impressed by the quality of the work, so thank you. And I want to thank the board for bringing us to this stage so professionally in terms of all of the processes you've initiated that have resulted in this work. And this gentleman is our general manager. And so I just want to say thank you, and also for the opportunity to exercise my capacity for praise.
Hi, I'm Paula Black. I wanted to begin by welcoming Mr. Deppy to the committee and to the board, and congratulating you, and also just noting that our unpaid volunteer board does a tremendous amount of work, and I'm just really glad to see that you're back to full strength, because I've been tremendously impressed by what you've been managing to achieve while your numbers have been reduced, so welcome. I also wanted to thank the general manager for the RFP. As someone who used to both write and respond to professional services RFPs, I thought it was a really excellent document. Clearly showed a lot of thought and work, and I'm delighted to understand how much input there's been from the community, because at the end of the day, this decision is going to be a community decision. It needs to reflect the community's questions, the community's desires, the community's input, and it needs to be understood by the community. I'm really encouraged to see the board building on the work that the ad hoc committees did in the last term. There was always a concern that perhaps a lot of that work would fall by the wayside, and I'm really pleased to see you moving forward with these decisions. I think we all have to accept and embrace the fact that informed decisions are good decisions, and we shouldn't be afraid of gathering information. The more information that we have, the better the decision that we're going to make as a community. So I just wanted to thank you all and commend you for taking this step forward. Thanks.
thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Hafner. I'm a member of the Kensington Property Owners Association Board, but I'm here on my own behalf just to weigh in as a resident of Kensington for 14 years. Personally, I have felt that in many ways, with respect to the police department and police issues, we have been kind of flying blind for a long time because of lack of information. And I understand the constraints that the board is under with respect to those issues, but I really congratulate Tony, you, and the board for pursuing this path, which I hope will present us with very concrete information about not just the current state, so that we have a deep dive into exactly where are we, what is happening, what services are we providing well and not, but also the information that would allow us to see a future state, which is the needs of the community as defined by the community. The one appeal that I would make is that I understand the strong feelings in the community. You can see from the yard signs that are up. The appeal that I would make is, please let us make decisions based on fact and information that we all see together, and not on, emotion. I feel like we've been there for too long, and this is a great opportunity, I think, for us. My other appeal is that the public be involved in as many ways as possible, and when that involvement occurs, again, that it be offered on the basis of information and fact and not emotion. And I would finally just request that the final report be made, broadly available, and I hope the report will not be redacted in any way, so that the public can't see the full report. So thank you so very much for pursuing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any further comment?
Jim Watt. Sorry. So far I've made it, but I think I'm fading fast here, which is probably will be appreciated by all of you. I did have an opportunity to talk to Tony today about the budget, and at the same time I indicated to him that I had some suggested changes to the 4 phases that are in your packet tonight. And I would like to explain a little bit some of the background as to why I am recommending the changes that I am, and I will provide that to you as a handout. In the introduction to the RFP that's in tonight's packet, there is a description of the current makeup and scheduling of the police department, with an organizational structure that has been in existence since 1984. Because the scheduling of officers is verbalized, it's very difficult to visualize what this means. However, I will provide you with a handout. I will provide you with a handout consisting of a flow chart that diagrams what this shift schedule looks like. And by the way, I have a few extra copies.
In a single page, right?
It's a single page.
I just want to remind you about a 5-minute time limit, okay? Just before you.
What this schedule shows you is that the weekday bracket, that is the time period between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m., there are a total of 5 officers on duty, whereas from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., there are only 1 to 2 officers on duty. Now that we have a general manager and have several years of experience of being shorthanded by 2 or 3 officers, while still ranking as one of the safest towns in California, it's time to ask ourselves how many officers we really need. Can we supplement part-time retired officers? Do we need a full-time traffic control officer? Could we contract out detective duties? And should our full-time chief fill in for supervisory duties? We should also be asking why officers should work an exhausting 12-hour shift and how things can change so officers spend more time to patrol and not in the office. All these issues may be covered under what is called scope of work, but it would have been nice to see more of these issues fleshed out in the proposal. The scope of work phase 1 of the project calls for an analysis of existing service levels and an assessment of the organization. If done objectively, it would show that the department has been in turmoil for the last few years. Therefore, any consideration to maintain an in-house police department needs to assume a total revamping of existing practices, assuming that it is not clearly something that is not clearly conveyed in the package before you. The scope of work also calls for a financially sustainable in-house police department over the next 5 to 10 years. I believe it will be almost impossible to provide such an analysis given the assumptions about staffing levels, CalPERS investments, MOU negotiations, and officer turnover. Rather, I think you should come up with your best case standalone department and see how it compares with your outsource options. The scope of work states you will seek contracting proposals based upon your organizational goals. However, the organizational goals of an in-house department could be quite different if outsourced. For example, in outsourcing, you will probably utilize the services of the chief and their detective staff. You may also have a supervisor that works out of the main office and calls in other officers when backup is required. Then there are lots of intangibles that will need to be part of any contract, like length of time officers serve in Kensington, ability to offload an officer back to the contracting agency if the community desires, the MOU terms of the contracting agency, their unfunded police liabilities, the history of the agency in terms of workers' comp issues, and the disciplinary problems, the maintenance of cars, the use of existing police office, and of course the terms of the contract and the mechanism by which costs will be allowed to increase. Finally, I saw no specific reference to the potential costs of the KPPCSD for exiting CalPERS or startup and training costs. Here are my recommended changes. So what you'll see is I am suggesting that we break these phases down into the same phases, the same headings, but with different bullet points.
I'm sorry, could you begin to conclude your comments?
All right, we'll just take a look at it. That's all I have to say.
Okay. All right, thank you. I want to remark that this document and our investigation of this issue is part of a two-pronged approach. The board wants to know what is the potential and possibility for our future. At the same time, we also want to know what difficulties and problems already exist that we are unaware of, and what could we do to rectify that situation. So this is, I understand the idea that we're looking perhaps at a I don't want to say fantasy, but ideal department. However, we also are taking a close and careful look at the department that we have and the ways that we could improve it, because we have a working department today, tomorrow, and next week, and we want to begin immediately making those improvements for the community and for our employees. Are there any other further questions or comments?
I just wanted to point out one thing that occurred to me, if I may. Tony, you talked about a 5 to 10 year time frame of sustainability if we keep our own force, or we keep something like our own force. We ought to also, I think, consider the sustainability issues that go along with contracting out as well. But I'm sure you thought of that. Just wanted to mention it.
Hi, Linda Lipscomb again, once more. I want to
emphasize a point that was just made by President Cheris Watt. We have a department here which ministers to the needs of the citizenry. Our first order of business should be looking to how can we improve that department, how can we make it function as smoothly as possible and minimize the cost. Contracting out is a whole change, it's a sea change in the way our services would be directed in this community. And I don't want to see short shrift paid to just working with what we have and getting in some good methodologies, good evaluation systems, taking a look at process and procedure with what we have, which has produced one of the safest communities and with the richest environment that I've ever lived in, and I've lived here 40 years. I have had nothing but good relations with this department. And I just think the emphasis, the idea that, well, we're going to find out whether or not we should be contracting out here is the wrong place to put this. It's the wrong assumption. We have a functioning department that has been delivering the services, and we should find a way to make that run as well as it can right here in Kensington. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any further comments? All right. Then I'm going to make a motion that the board adopt the request for proposals for an evaluation of options related to delivering police services prepared by General Manager Constantoros with changes identified by the board this evening.
I'll second the motion.
I'm not quite sure what changes we identified.
Okay.
Can we go
I'm
over
going
that
to
again, please?
Specifically go over Director Hassai, the comments that I'm going to, the improved introduction that identifies more closely our community description. The fixing on, page 4 of the description of our current staffing situation. The applying the ideas possibly for public input in other phases of the project, the application of the recommended performance measures to evaluate success to phase 2. Yes. The recommended performance measures to evaluate success, the last line of phase 4, we want to apply that to phase 2. I misspoke again. Phase 2 as well. We're going to change on page 9 the consultant's proposal that they require that they submit 10 paper copies. And on the final page, page 11, that we replace the word city with district. And any additional changes?
I just have they all sound fine to me. I just am a little bit confused about putting the fourth bullet in phase 4 into phase 2. I'm not sure.
That was my suggestion, and
I know it was. I just wondered if you could explain it a little bit.
All I wanted to do is make sure that as part of the examination of our own department, we are clear on performance measures for success for ourselves, which, to be honest, I don't know that we have any right now. Do you know what I'm saying? So if we're going to identify, if we go into the phase 4 of looking at other departments to contract out, and we're identifying performance measures for success, that's obviously performance on a contract and on services, but it would be nice if it's appropriate and if it's possible, as we look at our own department, that we're clear on how we would evaluate our own success going forward.
Okay, well, I thought that line in phase 4 was applied to our own department as well. Am I wrong about that, Tony?
The intent on phase 4 would be the recommendation of the consultant. So if the consultant makes a recommendation that the board adopts, that we also include measures for that recommendation.
So it would be either way, whether keep our own department or contract out or somewhere in between.
Correct.
Right, okay, just want to make sure I understood what your intent was. And I don't.
We don't need to move.
So we don't need to move it necessarily.
Phase 2.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had one other change that Director Hassai had recommended about any professional or personal connection to the KPPCSD or any residents be included in the application. And then Mr. Watt had some suggestions that I think should also be considered. I can work on those individually if you'd like.
I would be comfortable with authorizing GM Constanturos to look at these suggestions and
Great, I
adopt
agree.
and massage what he would like, perhaps in consultation with President Chair-Swat to finalize it. I think we've covered it quite well.
I think it's a good idea.
I also wanted to note that there were 4 recommendations. When you are voting on this, you're really voting on these 4 recommendations. I think you wanted to consider possibly changing one of them to 2 interviewees from the board. If the board decides that, it would be helpful for me if you would also identify the 2 that you would designate.
All right.
I would be very happy to serve on this. I would like to also nominate Len, but I'm happy to do
No,
it.
I would like to, let me make a new motion. How, shall I? All right. I would,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
oh, we have a
Perhaps
motion on the table.
I wasn't going to get that technical. I was going to suggest that we identify the 2 directors as an ad hoc subcommittee for this limited purpose.
Okay. Wonderful. So should we make 2 motions? Would that be simpler for record?
You can do it all in one
I
motion.
can do it all in one. All right. Can I
Have to make sure that she gets it all down, poor thing.
slowly?
There's always the recording.
All right. I'll make a motion that the board accept and authorize General Manager Constanturos to develop and prepare the request for proposals for an evaluation of options related to delivering police services with the changes thus identified by the board this evening. And I nominate Director Hassai and Director Welsh to interview finalists with the General Manager and Interim Chief of Police to recommend a firm to the board.
You can just adopt them all the recommendations. You don't
All
have
right,
to
we will.
restate them. I did want to note also that I had mentioned the possibility of including a police chief from another agency, and I would like some feedback from the board on that.
The potential difficulty I see is should that agency choose to submit, so no, that would disqualify an agency for submitting.
It would not disqualify them.
Then I think it could be problematic myself.
I
don't-
agree. If they were not submitting, I would be less concerned about it myself.
I think if you would like to solicit some, solicit some information from other jurisdictions you have questions, you have want some ideas, but I think to make them part of the formal interview process, should they be submitting, gives them an unfair advantage.
It could be the kind of thing where the request goes out, but if they exceed, they have to acknowledge that they wouldn't be submitting a proposal. That would be one way to handle it, if you feel it's that important. I mean, I can see why you'd want the input, and I actually would like to know how important you think it is to have that kind of input.
It would be good to have input from a police chief outside the organization who would be kind of an uninvolved third party, and we could invite somebody from outside maybe outside the county to do that.
I think that that's something that I would like to consider if we could at a later date. But I think having adjacent or agencies or those that would be applying could be highly problematic and look like partisanship. So,
Before the board votes on the motion, may I ask the president to clarify if she intends this to be an ad hoc subcommittee?
yes, I do intend, thank you, I do intend that the Director Welsh and Director Hassai will form an ad hoc subcommittee for the purposes of interviewing. All right, would you like to comment on our motion? All right.
Celia Conkus. It seems to me that the whole reason for this proposal that's being put forth is that we want to explore whether or not we should look at contracting and/or keeping the district the way it is. And it seems to me that it should be 2 members of the board who very strongly campaigned for exploring whether or not to contract. And I don't mean to offend you, Len, but you've stated so strongly opinions that were for...
What opinion did I state about contracting out? And please enlighten me, other than we need more information.
That's today. In the past...
I have never said anything different, Celia, ever since I've been asked about this issue.
What I have heard is that you felt very strongly about combining the district, combining the police district with the fire board. Okay, that...
Yes to that, on the record.
That, to me, already has a very strong bias, and so it seems to me that it would not be a good thing, a good fit for you to be on the ad hoc committee to be interviewing.
Well, let me just also clarify, what we're looking for now is not the decision about whether we contract or not. We're just looking to examine the option. So just want to make sure that's clear.
No, you're really just looking at consultants.
I understand and appreciate your concern. I've considered pretty carefully before I thought about which board members I would recommend who would ably execute this interviewing process. And I want to tell you that I have full confidence in both directors, especially Director Welsh, in terms of bringing educated and experienced to the interviewing and identifying some of the pitfalls. I see what you're also saying about perspective, but I am confident that he can be unbiased and bring to us a firm that will present good information. So, you're welcome.
Len, I like you very much, but I am not confident that you will perform.
Well, in this case, the board will
welcome
be
to your
for you.
opinion.
The board will be for you. But I thank you for your comments. And so at this time, we'll vote on the motion. It was a few minutes ago, but if you will. So all in favor of executing the motion, say aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Okay, the motion passes 5-0. Thank you, General Manager Constantoros. We give you a whole lot of new work. All right, I thank you for attending this evening's meeting. We will meet again if you're not available for the Finance or Solid Waste Committee meetings. Always exciting, always exciting. We will be meeting here again on September 28th. It's Thursday evening. Probably at 6:30 p.m. we'll begin our closed session, 7:30 p.m. Regular meeting. I make a motion that we adjourn.
I second.
Second and third.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes 5-0. Have a good evening.